Hello, everyone. This is Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritually Inspired Show. And my guest today is Ben Joseph Stewart. Filmmaker and musician, Ben Joseph Stewart has a style for the conscious community. Before his touring rock group Hierosonic disbanded, Ben had already launched his third full-length documentary with global viral attention. Most recently, he launched a 14-part series called Psychedelica and also another one called Limitless, both running on Gaia.com. Ben is currently finishing a film on cannabis to be released in 2020. Music, sports, psychedelics, flow states, earth mission, and soul path integration is what Ben will guide you to discover within. Ben, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You are quite a young person, and you understood that, being in a awake state is so beneficial for you. How did it come? How did you come to that conclusion?
That's a good question. I've gotten asked this obviously quite a bit, but I think it was a natural evolution. I had a brother who, back when I was maybe 11 or 12, he put the Tao Te Ching in my hand, and he was only a year and a half older, but he was always into magic. He was into tarot. He was into alchemy, all these esoteric arts. And so I looked up to my older brother, and I got into a lot of the same stuff. Surprisingly, he's also the guy, it even says on the film, my brother, Dan Stewart up here, he's the one that really got me into film and taught me how to do the editing, all that kind of stuff. He got me into music, so all of my passions. So I could say that was probably where it really started. But I didn't really go off on my own conscious awakening path until I would say part of it started early when I was in school. While a lot of my friends, there was a lot of heroin and opiates going through my school. And for some reason, whereas I would have ended up with that very same crowd, I ended up trying mushrooms at age 14. And I never got too big into it, but I think that kept me from trying all the rest of it, where a lot of my friends were doing pills. I always just felt that kind of like squashes your consciousness, and that the mushrooms helped me open my consciousness. But I never really did it in a sacred manner until I would say 20, I think I was 24 when I first went to the Amazon. And I tried ayahuasca in a ceremonial setting. And then I realized the importance of the ceremony and how sacred they actually take this experience. The way they speak about it, healing not just you and your body and your mind and your spirit, but also back your family line. You're healing for other people on the planet right now. That was really the beginning where I started. I had read before that we were all one, but that was when I started feeling it. And that was when I understood my mission. So I started doing films. I was a musician still at the same time, but I was doing films, and all of the films that came out they were free. They were absolutely free online, and they were also, I produced them. I had a soundtrack because I really wanted to engage people with art. I feel that art is one of the higher human faculties, and it speaks to us on a higher and more integrated way, whereas other ways it'll move you emotionally, but it does nothing intellectually for you, or vice versa. So I really wanted to engage people, and that's what sent me on my spiritual path. Probably from age 24 until now I'm 37. So that was my big journey there.
Interesting. So yeah, not too many people understand the sacredness of this type of ceremonies. And I have a close friend who tried, I think, any drug which was on the market. He's safe now. He's in his 50s. And one day he told me that he tried mushrooms, and he just ate them on the street with his friend. And by the time they got home, they were high, and it was a great experience. And they never tried since. And he thought that, ayahuasca, no big deal. He can have the shaman coming to his home and do the same stuff. I said, no, you misunderstand these ceremonies. They really have to um, take place in a sacred environment. You have to invoke the spirits, and you have to have the right setting if you really want to take the benefits or have the reap the benefits of such ceremony.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely true. There's something about ceremony that allows you to oh man, it allows you to acknowledge that what could be construed as just kind of a distortion of consciousness allows for us to break out of a pattern and a way that we perceive. Because I think the way that we perceive, as much as you and I could see the same event, we think we're seeing the same exact thing, but our filters and our biases, whatever we're not understanding that we're seeing, will fill in the blanks differently. And so I think that's the interesting thing about ceremony, is it's humbling. I'll say that, you know, even any psychedelic journey that can get a little bit difficult, what it does first and foremost is it humbles you. And I think it also proves to us that we don't have the kind of control over our lives we think that we do. We'll have moments where things seem more predictable than others, but I think the beauty of ceremony, especially plant medicine ceremony, is you have a bunch of people together going through their healing at the same time. And then afterwards, actually one of the most beautiful parts of ceremony is the sharing circle. You actually get to hear other people and what they went through. And a lot of the times it even surprises you. Like somebody you'll think like, oh man, they were really having a rough time. And then they'll go off and say, it was just beautiful. I was in the cosmos and everything like that. So yeah,
Yes, that part is amazing. And I usually, I take notes if I get the permission of those in the circle. I take notes because the stories are just unbelievable. And I can tell you, I give you an example. I mean, my first ceremony, I had another person who was a newbie, and he started crying from the beginning till the end. He cried continuously. And we met several months later, the same setup. He was a totally different person. So self-contained, very mature. His talk was different. It was unbelievable how much he was able to change in a matter of 6 months. And I told him that, and he said, wow, I realized that I've changed, but I didn't realize how much I've changed. But you telling me as a third person, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm. Yeah, you know, it's actually really beautiful about that is there's a lot of people contacting me right now. Since I've made films in the psychedelic space, there's a lot of people contacting me right now about making a film about PTSD, not even about the, you know, obviously getting into the recovery modalities, but also showing that PTSD is not just veterans and people who've been attacked, that there's so many different ways that we have post-traumatic stress. And what that is after a trauma, which could be many things. It can also be very incremental, like a deficiency in the body that terrorizes your nervous system, and then that changes the way you are socially. So there's something about trauma and I guess removing these boxes that we put, you know, if you've had these experiences, then you know what PTSD is. If not, then you might just need a little bit more magnesium in your diet. But we, you know, sometimes we forget that both sides could use healing. And actually there's not a clear-cut side. All of us probably have something that we need healing from in our past. And a lot of that, I'm not one to blame society. I think that, you know, we have just as much responsibility for our own healing, but we also don't seem to have a society that is very in touch with one another's feelings and how we're doing, and open conversations about, hey, I think you may need some nurturing. How about we get together? And every now and then you have good groups of friends that do this, but we also, me in America, raised, you know, where everyone plays football and you get picked on if you wear the wrong color and stuff like that. We're not as sensitive, and that can breed rough, tough people. And that, you know, there's an air of being a cowboy, and that's fine. right? But on the top of that, there's a lot of us not communicating honestly, and also shutting people down when they have an honest, authentic expression of themselves. And then especially parents, you know, we shut them down. I'm sure you saw my daughter rushed in, you know, my first impulse is like, no, don't come into the shot, you know. And that's me and my conditioning, thinking that, you know, the audience wouldn't understand that I also have a family. And
Correct.
so with that, you know, I think that that's where ceremony, and the fact that ceremony, you can do it as a sole individual, but group ceremony and group healing, a lot of the times we can see somebody going through, let's say, something even more difficult than we think we're going through, and that might give us permission to drop deeper into our own healing. We may think like, oh, I'd love some healing, but I don't want to cry in front of a group of people. And then you see, let's say, a veteran bawling in tears, and then you see how the entire group swarms around them, puts their hands on their back, and shows so much healing. And that, for somebody else who might have felt awkward about crying in front of a group, thinking it's not manly, can see something like that, and the group helps them drop into a deeper space. And so when I say group, I also mean very intelligently and wisely led group. So there needs to be somebody. I know that in my darkest ceremonies, plant medicine ceremonies, if I didn't have the shaman who was there, who I could see it in their eyes when I was going through my darkest moment. I could see it in their eyes, especially this one shaman, Noberto. He's Brazilian. He just was rubbing his thumb across my forehead and saying, "Navigate the intensity." And the way he was speaking was, he could have been speaking a different language. It was the way he was speaking that showed me, like, he was like, "I see you. You know, I see how deep you are, and I've been deeper." And I felt him holding me from a deeper space than I was even at. So that allowed me to feel all right, to feel held in that space. Just like a baby, when they're scared, they just need held, right? We have that traumatized baby inside of us because of a myriad of different things that we never really grew past. And we became functional adults, but, you know, mention something, you know, whatever, mention a very specific thing that brings you back to your childhood, and that can put, you know, full grown man into tears, which is beautiful. And so I think that the beauty of any spiritual path whatsoever, I feel a lot of them, they start becoming more open to, you know, let's support one another. Let's show each other, because I think that's what it's all about, community, how to hold others up through their healing. And there's actually a very clear example of this right now. I'm not sure if you know Nako and Medicine for the People.
No.
No. You know, I won't get into the details, but, you know, like, there's a lot going on right now that's been going on about the lead singer. And, you know, what's unfortunate is I've met this guy, and he's one of the most humble guys in the world. And I see his audience, and this isn't just his, but, you know, the audience loves you when your aura and your brand, it just seems perfect, but then find a blemish in it. And then everyone's like, I never liked him to begin with, and throw that guy away. And what's incredible is this guy's made music that's held space for some of my darker moments, for my road trips across the country. It was the soundtrack to my marriage up until now, me and my wife. So I think there's a lot of ways that we also need to step into, not the healing mode. We need to heal ourselves, but we also need to learn how to kind of play the shaman. Meaning, and really that doesn't mean we need to do the feathers and the other language and the chanting and the rattles. Really, being a true shaman is being able to see when somebody really needs their healing, to drop into that space with them, and to know what you should say and what you shouldn't say, because sometimes we don't know what to say, and it's fine to just show that you acknowledge, or do what they call mirroring, when somebody's talking and you just repeat the last 3 letters as a question back to them. Psychologically, there's something that happens that allows us to let down our guard, and we feel like, yeah, we're being listened to, so we can go on and go further. But it's not all about talking, you know. Sometimes it's really just showing our support with our presence. You know, sometimes I know when people are going through difficult scenarios, when I'm in ceremony with them, I'll just start humming a very low hum. And there's something about that that does something to the nervous system that seems to calm people down. Sometimes it can annoy people. So you got to know when to use that tool and when not to. But I think that's really, and that this is the epitome of my spiritual path. It's been very rooted into shamanism, plant medicine, natural movement, walking on the earth with bare feet, climbing in trees. Instead of going to the gym and doing pull-ups, why don't you climb up a tree, right? You know, there's a million, actually infinite different biochemical, neurochemical things that happen in nature as opposed to in the gym. So what I really like is, I think nature is our teacher. Nature's always been our teacher, and other people, plants, animals, and the collective of it all the elements, these are our teachers. And for me, that's kind of where I've been the deepest rooted since I started making films of a spiritual persuasion.
Interesting. Yeah, and most of this trauma we have is in our subconscious, and unless we go through this type of journey, we won't be able to unlock the trauma and, you know, cry it out. And you feel that relief, and you know what's going on and what path we should walk moving forward. And that's also but it's part of the healing process.
Yeah, yeah. You know, one reason that I do natural movement training, and I'm a lifestyle coach in this, because there's more than just natural movement. But the reason why I'm really into focusing on the myofascial system of the body, our posture, our gait cycle, the way we walk, all these things, they move our fascia. And the fascia is the tissues that connect to every organ, wrap around every bone. It's the seat of the cranial sacral pump. It carries water through it and memory, and it's also fiber optic in very healthy living tissue. But primarily, we are a species that we're primarily sedentary now. If you go back, let's say, just 10,000 years, not even 5,000 years ago, primarily we were, let's say, walking through dense vegetation, roughly 10 to 16 miles a day. We were squatting, and the women and the children were squatting in squatting stance for like 10 to 12 hours a day, every single day. And maybe with a day off, but they probably didn't think in terms of days off back then. They also had 1 billion times less EMFs that we do today. So the reason why I really get into, when we're talking about trauma and trauma release, trauma stores itself in our fascia. It stores itself elsewhere too, but our fascia is really a memory bank, and it holds water, which holds memory. But it also has nociceptors in it. And it, you know, by using it, we can have chronic pain simply because we're not using our fascia enough. And so trauma, when it gets stored in the body, you can either do these, you know, you store up your trauma for 15 years, and then all of a sudden you go through 6 months of plant medicine, and then bam, it all comes out like a dam being busted, right? Or you can find micro ways of, I call microdosing our integration. So that's, I do breath work every single day. I do movement if my body's asking for it. I do natural movement every single day. And so these are ways of every single day, like letting a little bit of the steam off. That way, when I do go to plant medicines, I notice that I'm not having these mind-shattering experiences anymore. I'll have really humbling ones where I will cry and cry and cry, or where I'll just laugh and laugh and laugh. And I'll just, when I'm laughing, I'm usually like, why aren't I always this happy about how beautiful this place is and how beautiful my friends are, and the fact that I just get to breathe, and it feels good to breathe when you allow yourself to appreciate it. So I think that having a discipline, especially a daily discipline, meditation is number one, but I don't think that you can even meditate properly if you don't have a proper movement repertoire. Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, a yogi told me this at Gaia.com. She said, that primarily yoga was a practice, not just of keeping the body healthy, but in allowing the body to get into a state that can allow for hours of sitting still on end. Because most of us, we sit and we try to meditate, and what's the thing that snaps us out of our meditation? There's something in our body that's just not feeling settled, and it starts to hurt, and our attention is just right there. So that's why I think there's so many things that we could do that may not even look like it's totally part of a spiritual path. But when I go outside in the morning and I just kind of like let the sun rain down on me and I just crawl like an animal through the grass, right? That's not like doing 1,000 push-ups or, you know, a bunch of bench presses and curls. What that's doing is reminding my body what the grass feels like. And we are a membrane. You know, the reason why walking barefoot on the grass, it's not just because you know, positive ions are pulled from the body and sucked into the negative ion repository of the earth. It's because there's microbes and phytochemicals and nutrients and things that we are a membrane, and when we come into contact with it, we are coming back into contact with that which we come from, nature. It's like completing that cycle, also psychologically. So I think if we were to introduce a discipline into our lives, just a little bit here, a little bit there, but daily, 3-4 times a week at the very minimum, I think most of us would realize that the path to healing our trauma doesn't have to have some coach or some, you know, like, you know, someone who's been to the depths. You know, it can be anyone it could be your dog that challenges you to get out and play around a little bit more. That may not do all of it. You know, I have to be honest, like playing around with your dog probably isn't going to take care of sexual abuse or, you know, having been in war. It's not going to get to the root of that, but it definitely helps. And it allows you to re-engage with life. And I think with that, probably the biggest traumatic event for most of us is our decision making. When we make a decision because we're afraid to make the decision we really want to, and we don't step down the direction of our real potential, I think that that does something to us psychologically that shows in our posture. And then eventually it becomes this thing that we blame on the way we stand, but it's not the way we stand. It's something that we're adopting. It's a psychological and physiological meeting ground. And I think that to me is why I make films, because they're artistic, they have music, they can get you into the information and bring you into the nuances of a world philosophy where this isn't all flawed. You know, when you're pointing out problems, you can also point out the fact that this is a very poetic way of getting me to awaken myself.
Definitely.
As long as I acknowledge the darkness outside and acknowledge that the darkness is mirrored within me, then we can start down the path of proper healing. But we need to engage with proper risks, not caution to the wind. I'm just going to do whatever. I'm going to drink until I black out. That's not risk. When I'm talking about risk is when you know you should be saying this to somebody who needs to be called out, and you're the only one they'll listen to, but you're afraid. You don't want to be, you know, you just want to be people pleasing, and it's extremely hard, right? Yes. That's what I mean. That can produce trauma if we don't step into our power. So I think when I do my coaching, that's pretty much the balance of it. I try and get people to use their body to discipline and organize their mind, but also to take risks, to go out and meet people. And I would say the number one thing that I notice with most of my clients is anxiety. It's just over years and years and years, I feel like the anxiety's gotten so bad to where I just don't want to see people anymore. I want to kind of hide away in my safe little man cave or woman cave. And, you know, when I see other people, I get anxiety because I might have to say something. And you know, what if they think I'm stupid or weird? I'm just going to stay inside. And that's something that really, really limits us more than not doing your yoga, more than, you know, somebody calling you names in the park or something like that. You know, that could lead to this. But really what I think the biggest trauma that we deal with is that we think that the problems of the outside world and the problems that we associate with inside, we think that they're bigger than us. that we don't have the potential to overcome them. And even if we think it and it's just way, way in the back of our minds, we still follow that lead. And then we allow life to do what it wants to us. And we make the decision to retreat. We make the decision to just be acquiescent. We're just like, okay, whatever you say, just don't make my life any harder. That's backing your potential into a corner. And, I think I've made my point. I think that's traumatic in and of itself. And I think that's the real purpose of having a spiritual pursuit is first you have to admit it to yourself. You have to admit that you're in this pattern that's cutting yourself off, and you would really love to share your mind with people. But when we're too rude to people, when we share our mind, I think that's, for the most part, we either didn't get the skills, but for the most part, we know how we're talking to people. And when we're really rude to people, when we try and voice our mind, it's usually because we've held our tongue for so long, and then all of a sudden it just blows up. We can't take it anymore. And then we're spewing years and years of even other people's abuse on us onto one person, right? And often it's our family, it's our children, it's our spouses, it's people we really love that we just unload on. So I think really stepping into our power is probably asking the right questions of who am I in meditation, and then stepping into our power and making small incremental steps towards what we know we incarnated on this planet to do. That's probably our best healing trajectory.
Yes. And along the same lines, do you think that indifference and selfishness are bigger plagues than any virus that might affect us in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give one example of that is you look at any of the Native American tribes that were studied, even South American, but there was really good anthropologist, Michael Winkelmann. I had him in Psychedelica, and he was one of my favorites in there. And he shows what psychoneuroimmunology is, which is like the placebo effect, but it's group placebo effect. They notice that, let's say, peyote churches, when you sit in there and everybody's hitting the drum, even the people who aren't hitting the drum, your heart is entraining itself to that same frequency, and you're a part of this, and then you're hearing the prayers, right? And you're hearing the intentions of it, and everybody's there for healing. That becomes the placebo effect, right? And it enhances the placebo effect within us. And even people like Wim Hof are showing us that he's basically proving that the mind does get into the autonomic nervous system, which is the placebo effect. When you spark your conscious connection with your autonomic nervous system, then it's not just it takes care of itself. A lot of it does, but you also need visualizations. You need to stay centered in it. As you go into that, you can ask of your autonomic nervous system certain things. And that's why black magic also can work if you are in, let's say, a plant medicine ceremony, but there's something very off about the shaman and very off about all the helpers and something like that. That could make for a terribly traumatic experience. Same medicine, same, even let's say most of the people are the same room, same songs and everything, but something is off. That's why you also have to be in the right space. And so selfishness, you mentioned selfishness, and I think that for the most part, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and also Claire Graves' spiral dynamics, it's all showing that there's this ascent of consciousness through life. And I think that trauma holds us into the more survival based and the tribal based. And when I say tribal, that also means gang style based, like your tribe, your gang, and whatever your gang says becomes your psychology as well. So I do think that those are subtle epidemics. And the thing is I don't believe that there's any naturally occurring virus, parasite, anything out there, nothing naturally occurring that could affect us if were in our proper state of consciousness. Because what I think you've heard, every one of us has cancer cells inside of us.
Right.
We all have dormant parasites. We
Yes.
all have dormant viruses. And some of us maybe a lot less than others. But, I mean, what do you do? What helps you keep parasite free? Having different microbes in your gut, right? So it's just like you have some that are commensal and some that are communal, and then some that are parasitic. The commensal ones, they help you, you help it. Communal ones, they may not help you, but they don't hurt you and they get benefit from you. So that's okay. And then there's parasitic, the ones where they harm you and they're the only ones getting the benefit. Parasites don't want you dead. They don't want the host dead.
Yes.
They don't mind you being sick because you're highly acidic. You're producing things inside your body that helps them live out their reproductive cycles. But I also think that's kind of what we're seeing in the planet as a whole, is we're seeing a parasitic mentality. And I put that in my second film, Chymatica. There is a global parasite, and it's more of a psychological nature than anything. And you can't just blame it on capitalism. You can't just blame it on communism or socialism or any ism, really. You have to take it for exactly what it is. We can't oversimplify it. And actually, once you try to start simplifying it into words, you're already losing the definition, the high definition picture of what it is. We are a very complex organism, this earth. We have a lot of humans, a lot of animals. I think a lot of higher species that, we, the average humans, don't know about, not just from out there, but, under the earth. I think some aren't even of a physical nature, but I think there's a lot of the times we're trying to break things down into, is it the parasite's fault, or is it this group's fault, or is it this political paradigm's fault? And really what it is I think all spiritual traditions have shown this. When you overly identify yourself with an external group or a philosophy or ideology, you're automatically cutting off your potential again. Because our potential as the observer, we acknowledge that a part of that is a lesson for us. Even the things that we want nothing to do with, the things that we find hideous and deceitful in our world, they're still there for a reason. And it takes a lot of hubris for us as individuals to say, I want my reality to be like this, and this is also how everybody else in the world should live. I agree that there are certain things I don't want on this planet, but I also understand that I don't know how this is meant to play out. So that's when I start acknowledging that I can't go into fear mode, because that disempowers me. So I need to bring back in what fear mode squashes out. And that's a healthy level of rising to the challenge, which is playful, it's curious, it's energetic, right? And even martial artists who get in the ring with one another, that's probably one of the most terrifying situations for most people, but they train for it and they train for it and they train for it until they eventually get to the point where they're so loose and calm in a life or death style scenario that they're just playing, right? They're back to a play state. And I really think that that's what we as adults seem to miss a lot more, is we think we are the teachers and the children are the students, and it's very black and white. And in a way, I think our children are more of our teachers. We should be treating them more like our gurus and our teachers and our elders, for sure. But especially when we're in our prime and we think we're the most intelligent and capable beings, and we see to our children and it seems like, yeah, but they don't have the language for it. And look, their head's so much bigger than the rest of their body. And, we come up with all these reasons to feel like, yes, but they're not fully human yet. No, my kids, even my little babies that are 1.5, they understand when you're not 100% there for them. If you're slightly disrespectful towards them, 1 year old, actually a couple months old, and they get those feelings. They get it. So they're there. They just don't have the language, as if I went to a different planet, could survive, but didn't know the language, the customs, nothing. That's what babies are. And in a way, I think we need to return back to a semblance of that. We need to keep our wisdom, but to remember that, look at them, they explore, they play, they don't judge, they don't mind what color the skin is of the people who are playing with them, as long as there's an equal level of respect for one another.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I learned to listen to my kids and apply what they are teaching me. And I started that when they were young. Now they are older, like 21 and 16 respectively. But I listened, and I also apologize when I made mistakes, just for them to understand that I respect their point of view, and their opinion counts. So I think that's important. And staying here with the young generations, what's your experience? Do you think they are in a state of spiritual indifference, or they are looking for something better?
So, I mean, to be in a state of indifference, I'm not seeing it in my kids, but just so you know, like, that's 5 years old and down. I think indifference, I wouldn't see it in kids this age unless they're truly traumatized. I mean, potentially. But you'd have to be a little bit older, and maybe, I'm just going to make assumptions here because I don't.
Yeah, 15,
really know.
16, even 20, 25 years old. They are young generations, and they are not necessarily interested in finding who they are or what their purpose is.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking, what's your experience if you encountered older, like 15 and up?
Oh, well, I do see that for sure. I and that's why I said, like, in my kids' age group, I don't see it, but in those older age groups, I think that's, if I had to guess where that's coming from, I think that we as a society collectively have, let's just say, failed to cultivate the right environment for them to understand that they belong here. Because I don't think many people understand that they belong here. When you're put into a system, like a school system, and then the kids kind of become the mob, right? The teachers are there, they can help out a little bit, but it's like being in prison. They're highly understaffed. The kids kind of police one another. Like, oh, you're really going to wear those shoes? Or what's up with your hair? And you know what I mean? Like, some of the most hideous ways of being. I don't know if we were in tribes and all parents were looking out for all kids, and we knew our tribe, and it wasn't thousands and thousands, it was more like 100 or 200 or something like that, and we pretty much knew everybody, there wouldn't be as much bullying. And if there was, it would probably be corrected in a group effort. Nowadays, the parents are so overworked that they're kind of using school and they're kind of using all these other things as a form of babysitting, just so they can keep their sanity. And their kids are having to adapt to a system that was set up probably, not just to indoctrinate them into the economic workings of society, which is fine, but I believe it's highly incomplete and very deficient right now. And also, the parents, they're not living out their mission. So when they come home and they see their kids getting out of line, they bring down the iron fist just like their boss would do to them. And humans are epic recreators of patterns, right? A pattern comes in, we don't even know if we believe it, but somebody else starts talking about the same topic, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Like, we knew that before 2 weeks ago when we heard our friend talking about it. We repeat a lot of patterns. And so I think, back to the kids, I think that we haven't yet set up what our ancestors had, rites of passages, where children went through some kind of risk taking because they knew that they were going to be safe. Like, even in Vanuatu, right, where the kids would jump off with this vine with only, not even like a bungee cord, like, it doesn't snap, but it only slightly bends, and they would frickin' bungee jump using a vine wrapped around their feet, off like a 50-60 foot tower. Most adults can't do that, and their kids are doing that, not just to prove themselves that they're brave, but there was a bit more of that, like, you have to conquer your fears, and we're here for you. You're going to be fine. You're safe. And when somebody conquers their fear at the age of 12. They just went through puberty. The entire tribe comes around and hugs them and says, yes, you know how this feels. That's when your spirit is one of us. And that's when the child knows that they earned their way into that group, right? They earned their way. It's not just, well, you were born, I have to love you, and now go to school and just do the same thing that the previous generations did. I think that's where the indifference comes from, if I really had to say, is the fact that we failed. And again, you know, we as a collective, it's easier to take responsibility like that. Like, I didn't create the educational system, but I'll take my share of responsibility. We failed to create the right set and setting for our children to feel like they belong on this planet and they belong to this earth. So they're so removed from it. They have their devices, and this is what they see their parents doing all day. So this is what they grow up doing, and their neck is slouched over and it's impinging upon their fascia, and 16 hours a day we're sitting. And we have our best friend is a device that tells us everything we want, and it never talks back to us when we're pissed off. We could throw it across the room and it'll still give us whatever we want, right? But when you try and do that to a friend, try to talk to a friend how most trolls are talking to people on social media, you'd never get away with it. You'd get into a fist fight or an altercation with somebody. We don't like doing that when you can see the eyes of the person that you just offended, right? But we don't mind doing it behind the safety of our computer screen in our own little man cave, woman cave, whatever it is. So I feel that's of utmost importance, is for us to reevaluate, what did we lose when we completely colonized ourselves? You know, because I didn't colonize anybody, but I'm colonized, right? I live perfectly colonized, and my children are coming up in that same way. So what can I do the best of my ability to show them, no, we still do come from the dust, right? And we return to the dust, and our spirit goes somewhere else. We eat and we drink of nature, and it replenishes us, and we learn lessons by listening to nature, by finding that inner stillness. And nowadays it's like, oh, learning that, you know, you go on Google and Google will tell you everything you need to know, but that's not the root word of education to begin with. Education is to draw out inner wisdom. It's not to shove information inside without the understanding of how to apply that. So that's what we need. We need a better infrastructure to raise our children. We need to raise our children better and show them that they are our teachers and they do belong and we need them. That's
so even going and picking up cherries from a cherry tree or going and picking up strawberries from the field, it's still a lesson, because they will figure out how the products, the cherries and the strawberries are coming along, and, you know, where they're coming from, and, you know, how much work is involved in growing them. So that's still a lesson, even if it's a small one, or it could seems like an insignificant one, but it's still a lesson. So,
yeah, you know, I just want to piggyback off that. That's it's unfortunately it does seem like an insignificant one, but here's where the beauty is. Have you heard of Rupert Sheldrake?
Yes.
Yeah. So love that guy, and he just did a talk about understanding waves and as analog models for, like, right now we have quantum computers making digital models of what's going to happen if you pump this much money into a third world country without these things in place. And so they can model that using a digital thing. Well, Rupert Sheldrake just did this one about using natural systems such as, I forget what the name was, but in the 1950s in England, there were a bunch of these analog models that used colored dyes. So there was water, and then it would flow into different chambers that would get colored in different ways, and then that would drip, and then it would kind of do this seismograph thing to show you how the force and effect of all the water being pumped into chamber one would affect this up here. And this was money, right? So you have money before it's apportioned into its allotments, and then you have it put into its allotments, so you can't put allotment 1 into allotment 2 once it's out of this tank, right? And then it's died, and then it goes and it shows you what it does with its force and effect. And it was a way to show the sustainability. Like Rupert was basically showing, like, you would have all these chambers that this tank would flow into, but what would happen is by the time this got low enough and only 4 chambers were filled and there were still 3 to go, these 3 chambers would have nothing and these would be completely filled, but there wasn't enough pressure over here to fill them all. Well, that should teach you something about sustainability with money. Okay, you know, we wouldn't have this fractional reserve. You can lend money out 9 times and there's never enough money in circulation to pay off the debts. That's a Ponzi scheme, just
Exactly.
to put it blatantly.
Yeah.
But we would be able to model and see that better if we used better systems. So now I'm going to go back to this insignificant lesson of picking strawberries. He mentioned in that very same talk, there's perennials and there's annuals.
Correct.
Right? And so the annuals, they will give all of their nutrition to whatever their fruits are because they're not going to be around the next year. So they don't mind giving all and then dying. But the ones that are coming back every single year, they hold some back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you would never understand what that means and why if you weren't out in nature picking strawberries and seeing the plant, like, oh, why? You know, you see certain plants that don't come back next year. You need to replant it. Why? Oh, well, these are the ones that, you know, they live once, they give their fruit, and then they return back to earth. I think we would inherently understand more like the indigenous First Nations people around the world understood sustainability, how everything is sacred. All animals, all people, everything is sacred. That didn't mean they didn't have fights and skirmishes and even wars, but they understood sustainability. They didn't have systematic ways of just wiping people out, right? And destroying the place so we can't enjoy it either. So I think we've removed ourselves so much from nature into this digital hologram of a kind of world and concrete jungles and things where all of our information is digitally based. And we, you know, we're washing our hands when we get a little bit of dirt on it, right? You know, but these are the types of lessons that I think the First Nations people learned. Picking berries, understanding how to track where the game is, right? They're not in the same spot like the supermarket. You go to the same place, everything's predictable. Back then they had to use their minds. They had to forage. They had to identify, no, this looks exactly like this mushroom, but this mushroom will kill you. This one's really good for you. Okay, so you got to teach the younger kids that, you know, when you get a cut and it's infected, oh, we need this plant, right? How many people today can do that?
A handful of them for sure, yeah.
Not even close to the same ratio, because you had a tribe, 50, 60% of them probably knew how to identify most things. Nowadays, 5-6% if you're extremely lucky, right?
In certain areas for sure, not everywhere.
Right, not everywhere. You know, like there are some places where people are still living close to the earth like that. And I would like to see more of that. And in a way, I kind of think, you know, back to the children. What would be the best school for children? Well, first thing I would not do is sit them in a chair for 8 hours a day staring at a 2-dimensional blackboard while somebody talks at them, right? Making squiggles. I would do that maybe an hour. That's fine. I would do that for maybe an hour. But the majority of the day, I would have them engaging with each other, engaging with nature. You know how most animals learn about their body, learn about gravity, learn about how strong they are? They wrestle. All mammals wrestle, like dogs. They'll play and they wrestle around with one another. Kids do that too, but you know, when you grow up, you need to get serious about life and sit down in a chair in front of a computer, and that's what you're going to be doing for a good 40, 50 years. You better get used to it. That's kind of what it's turned into. And I think what children would be most incredibly served by is not just engaging with their learning by using their body, learning how to ask more critical questions, but also the arts, expressive ways, dynamic ways of expressing yourselves, like through dance, through music, through singing, using your voice. Like I can speak to you like this, but if I were to start singing like Michael Jackson, you would get a whole range of different emotions coming at you that's impregnated with so much more information and detail that I couldn't have gotten across had I not gone to that level. So I think that's really important for children too. And I think the children, they're not as conditioned as we are. So I think that's where we should really start. And they will teach us. I can tell when I get out of line with my daughter, just the look on her face, I know that, like, oh, bad papa, you know, and I know when to apologize as well. And I think that's important. Like you said, you know, that, like, you know, when we all have our moments, but if you can own up to it, then they will realize, oh, well, you know what, like, I don't have to chastise myself and beat myself up for it. Own it and then let it go. Own it and then let it go. Don't just let it go and forget about it. You got to own it first, because then you learn the lesson. Then you let it go. And I think that's the thing about trauma, is we don't know how to own these very, very heavy lessons. You know, going to war and coming back as somebody at the age of 19, 20, seeing half their friends being, you know, blown up by an IED and seeing that with their own eyes, that's not easy to come back from. But you have to own where that decision started from. I took the oath. I went into the military. I didn't see anything that horrendous, but, you know, I was pumped full of vaccines, pumped full of a bunch of ideas, sent around the world and told lies as to where I was, or what mission I was actually doing. And I can't say lies. That might be a little too harsh. It's compartmentalized need to know information. I'll say it that way, because I respect all the men and women in the armed forces, and the people that I served with. I felt such a camaraderie, like a family there. But that's also part of why we are more willing to do things we would never do with our own conscience if we're seeing other people do it, people that we love, and we don't want them to get hurt, so we follow them into battle. And so I think that's what we need to be teaching our children, is how far do our decisions take us? How much impact do our decisions have? In a lot of ways, again, if we keep thinking the outside world is what's making our life what it is, then we're missing the point. It's our decisions. And it may be scary, but that doesn't mean we weren't able to engage with it. We made the choice whether we were going to engage with it or not. And then that started becoming a pattern. So how do we start breaking that pattern? Well, some people, I'm not going to say it's too late for them, but it's really difficult with highly conditioned people. So what does that mean? The next generation. How do we change this? How long would it take to really change the world in the way that you and I would probably love to see? One truly loved generation. Just one truly loved generation with the freedom to explore. Same way that we are with, you know, plants in our garden. We don't tug on them to grow up faster, right? We just give them what they need. We protect them from things that'll harm them. And bam, they blossom just like our children. And so the more we can get out of their way, I think that's the beautiful future that I'm looking for. And you know what? We can't have that until some generation, hopefully our generation, completely wakes up from our own conditioning, and we go through a beautiful wake-up call. We go through that humbling of our ego, and we humble ourselves to realize, man, that's the impact that my ego had on this planet, you know? And this was the impact of my soul, right? And I want more of this. That's the path. We all have ego. We can't condemn our ego. We all have an identity, but which one's in the driver's seat? Are our fears driving the vehicle, or is our soul driving the vehicle? So that to me, it fully encompasses what I would love to see next on this planet, is for us to focus on a highly advanced educational model that allows for children to get up from their chairs, move their bodies, engage with one another differently, and express themselves in the arts more. I don't mind math, geography, calculus, all those things, but let that be advanced training once you get into the later years of high school or college. I don't think we should rob our children at an early age by sitting them in chairs for 8 hours a day. I think so. We need to be more sensitive, and we need to be asking more questions like this. The science is now showing us that we can move at a quicker pace. We can experiment with a couple things, and whatever 2020 is doing to this planet, it's a different world. And I think it's actually prime time for something to make millions of people question the world that they're living in, to question their reality, because it'll make it easier for us to try some new things, and I don't think those new things have to be scary. And yes, there will be some people say that that's a blah, blah, blah agenda, that's a left agenda, that's a right agenda. But at the end of the day, those people, there's a part of them that knows we are all one. And so the more we do our job identifying with something more transcended than a dualistic, combative paradigm, the more we're setting an example for the younger generations to step into our path, not the path that's really just the feedback loop.
Yes, I mean, reforming the educational system is very important. And I know there are co-ops who initiated different type of schooling. And I recently watched Zac Efron's Down to Earth, the episode in Costa Rica. And there is a community there where children don't take exams, then they go to school in nature. They are left alone to do whatever they want that particular day. They have to touch on math, as you said, some physics, but they play with birds. They go and look at how the parents cultivate this crop or that crop. So nature is there. They're very engaging into daily activities. They learn a foreign language. And it's just a beautiful way to learn and grow. And along the same lines, I recently also talked to a number of scientists which have no doubt that human species is heading for a massive extinction with or without the help of pandemics or other human-induced calamities. Mm-hmm. And you combine that with AI potentially taking over. Is this disrespectful approach to life and nature, which we already talked about, which takes us into that direction? What do you think?
It's anywhere between an extinction and a correction, what we're doing right now. And honestly, I'm optimistic, but I'm also realistic. I can hold both at the same time. And I understand that just because of, I'm going to go there and say it, just because of EMF pollution, especially what's going to happen once we jump to 5G. I forget, I just heard it yesterday. Dr. Mercola has a book called EMF, and he was talking about the number of insect species that are dying off by the year. And it's just incredible. And we don't understand, like me, I don't need to understand what all those insects are doing to keep me alive. But at the end of the day, there is this beautiful circle of life that we are ignoring. And I think you said AI, really what a lot of it seems to be is we are making it easier for this to be an environment conducive to machines, right? Not conducive to humans anymore. And it seems like we just assume that we can adapt to whatever. Oh, well, when I hold my phone 2 hours a day and I don't feel a problem with that. It's like, okay, fair. That's a fair statement. But there are some who are, children who are playing in a school with a 5G tower literally built onto the school. It's going to be unescapable, whether you think you have personal sovereignty or not. So are we moving in that direction? Absolutely. Are we moving there with so much momentum that we almost can't stop? It seems so. Do I think that talking about the dangers of 5G is going to slow down 5G development? I think it could. But it's like it's fourth quarter in the game and we're down by 30 and we need like 3 miracles to happen in a row type of situation. That's what it seems like. So yes, we are moving in that kind of a direction. And I do believe, there's something very curious. I won't even say what I think it is, but there's something curious about the timing of COVID, right? And then the timing of the race riots in the US right afterwards that places military in major cities around the country. All this talk about China, who was the first to 5G, really they're, let's say, 5 years ahead in 5G and potentially AI. That's speculative. But I really feel like the reason why the US is racing with blinders on towards this goal of 5G dominance is not because they're just like, yes, we're going to microwave everybody in the on the planet. It's probably because they're like, we can't have China become the #1 superpower. I don't know if you ever heard of Thucydides' trap. Sorry, Thucydides was an ancient Greek historian who said it was the rise of Athens and the fear that it instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable. Mm-hmm. And then the Thucydidean trap shows that there's 16 different examples of there being a superpower and then another power rising through the ranks very swiftly. 12 out of 16 of them ended in war. All right. Now, US has been #1 superpower for quite some time, many decades, at least, let's say a century. And over the past 30, 40, 50 years, especially the past 20 years, China, #2. So that's not to say we have to go to war with them, or it looks very likely that we will. But I think the reason why we are racing to just throw up 5G technology without knowing what the long-term health impact of non-ionizing radiation, because that's what they say, but it's non-ionizing. It's not like Chernobyl, that's ionizing radiation, right? But there's a whole slew of things that non-ionizing radiation we know can cause many of the same effects, just with a different mechanism of action inside the body. So without getting too heady, why is that happening? I used to really think that there was this cabal that's really for, a depopulation agenda. And I don't 100% not believe that, but I don't believe it's as simple and cut clear and dry that, oh man, there's 7 billion. No, I think we'll kill off 6.5 billion so we have a nice 500 million there, right? I don't think it's that simple. I think really what it is we have such a complicated system that is not derived from natural systems, right? It's man-made and it's imposed upon nature. It's the same thing that colonizing is, right? We're imposing will upon a naturally occurring system of biology. And now we want to put up these cell towers that could likely kill off insects, including bees, destroy our crops, irradiate our crops, irradiate ourselves, right? Why? Because we can't let China become the #1 economic and military power in the world. So that's the backwards kind of thinking that I believe, has gotten us into this place. And I don't believe that our elders are in the best situation to change their minds. So I really believe it's up to people who are raising children now to really raise our children right, because I think that we need changes now. But I think it was the statement that the Buddha, somebody asked the Buddha, when's the best time to plant a tree? He said 20 years ago. Yes. When's the second best time? Right now. Yeah. Right. So when was the best time to really start raising, beautiful children? Ages ago. And this is why the Native Americans, especially the Lakota, when their council would sit, they wouldn't make a single decision that made an impact on their planet or their tribe, which they saw as the same thing, without consideration to the next 7 generations. Yes. How will this influence the next 7 generations? You ask the average person today, how often do you think about what you're doing right now is going to influence the next 7 generations? We can't even think of it. We maybe can think of our great-grandchildren, but we can't even conceptualize 7 generations away. I think there's a kernel of truth there that we need to start humbling ourselves a little bit more and coming back to these nature-based, ecological instead of economic systems, things that are sustainable by their very nature, not because we outsmarted it, but because that was its very design. And I think that's when all the stress of having these jobs and coming home and taking it out on our children, that's because deep down inside, these indifferent children you were talking about, I think deep down inside, we know the system is pretty BS.
Yeah.
We know that it's not functional. We know that we have to adapt to a dysfunctional society to function, right? And I think it was Krishnamurti who said, it is no measure of health or sanity to be well adapted to an insane society, right? And I think that's what we're experiencing. And when we wonder, like, what went wrong? That guy down the street, he was quiet, but I never knew he would go on a killing spree. And, you know, like, yes, that's tragic, but I think that that can't just be blamed on the individual. It can't just be blamed on society either. It has to be looked at as what it is. But society definitely had a role in that. Because what do some people do when, like, their pension's taken away for a stupid reason, or they got demoted because they were supposed to get the job, but their boss's cousin got it, right? You know, and that's the kind of system we live in. Not that that didn't happen thousands of years ago in tribes, but there was at least some kind of close-knit governing community that held that psychoneuroimmunology, and everybody had a purpose and a place. And now our purpose and place, we don't know what it is. Put the thing on top of the other thing and send it down the conveyor belt. It's not a purpose in life. Yet that's what happened to all the skilled craftsmen who could build beautiful things. Eventually they turned into somebody who just puts this part on that part and sends it down the line. So how do you derive meaning from that? Oh, well, you're supporting your family. That should be good enough for you. Well, that's a great sentiment. It's great to say, you know, yeah, I'm feeding my family, but how many people go to their job and they just, I'm feeding my family. I'm feeding my family, right? They hate it. They get no sole purpose out of it. They hate it, but they're doing it because they have to. I'm sure that's exactly how slaves felt throughout history.
Yeah, for sure. And I have so many questions for you, and slaving is one of them, because in one of your movies, I think in Ungrip, you mentioned about, you know, slavery, and I think we are all financial slaves. We are slaves to a paycheck, to a supply chain, which breaks down. We cannot get our groceries tomorrow or a week from now. Do you think that spirituality is a way to escape this type of slavery?
Escape. I think true spirituality, I don't think it's an escape from that. I think that the tools of spirituality can be used to a lower potential, meaning just to block it out, just to find a way to calm down the nervous system while we're in a system that ranks up our nervous system, right? That's not really sustainable. And eventually that person might find a way to cope with a system. And then maybe on their deathbed, they realize that wasn't what I was meant to do with my life, just to cope with it, right? And so this is where I believe that, you know, there was all this big contention, especially back in the 60s and 70s, where you hear there's people who think the way to change the world is by meditating, and others who think, like, that's doing nothing. You're just wasting your time. I'm out here protesting and making a statement, right? I think there's both of them together make more sense than both of them separate. And the reason I say that is because a truly spiritual person, if you realize what I believe spirituality is best shown by a bodhisattva. Now, a bodhisattva is different than a nirvani. And in Hinduism, somebody who reaches nirvana, it's like they reach this state of consciousness where they're like in heaven, right? And they can stay there in nirvana forever. But a bodhisattva reaches that level and then enters themselves back into the furnace and the wheel, right, of suffering. Why? For others. And that's what Christ did, right? These are these things that, like, all these noble prophets did. They sacrificed themselves for everybody else. That's a bodhisattva. That's a true spiritual path. Now, I believe that what you said about the escaping from, like, financial slavery, you can do that with spiritual tools. And maybe you can reach nirvana and you can be like, I am super happy exactly where I'm at. I don't need to fight the system. I've made peace with it. That's great. That's great. And maybe that actually is that person's path. I couldn't judge anybody else's path, but I know for me, if I was still involved in, and I believe I am involved in, even if it's happening in China and I'm over here, if there's sex trafficking going on in China and none going on over here, I'm sure I would feel like safe, but I wouldn't feel like my job here on this planet is done. Yeah. And it might only, I could find clever ways to Netflix and chill and get rid of the thought, right? But I think those are all the same thing. You're running from what your soul and your heart is telling you, no, 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 no. Are you really going to let these children that look only slightly different than your own daughter be harmed on the other side of the planet? Well, what can I do? Well, that's a great cop-out. What can I do? If it was your daughter, you wouldn't be saying, well, what can I do? I'd be saying, who do I have to talk to? And I would be jumping into action. So that's kind of the way that I feel personally. Spirituality can be escapism. It can be. But I believe it's a case-by-case basis. And the only way to know whether you are escaping through your spiritual disciplines is to ask yourself in meditation. And you really have to be honest and open. Like, what else would I be doing? Should I be questioning this system, right? Like, should I go to my boss and tell him, like, you know what, listen, I know that I know you're asking me to do this task, but I can't in good conscience do it because of this, that, and the other. You're either going to have to find somebody else, or you can let me find a solution that doesn't disadvantage all these other people over here. And then that would be taking initiative. And you know what? I bet you a boss would be like, you want to solve the problem without doing all that? Fine. Because I don't know many bosses who are like, oh, I can't wait to fire half my labor force. And that doesn't happen. What happens is a boss has higher ups, you know, investors or whatever. And it's like, man, I only have payroll for half our people. Yo, John, come over here. Fire half the people. It's on you, right? And then John comes back and says, I can't in good conscience do that, but I found a way to where we don't have to fire those people. I came up with a way where we all take this much of a pay cut and we put in an extra blah, blah, blah for the next 6 months. And then bam, we're back on that. That boss would probably be like, do you want a promotion? Do you want to be my right-hand man so you could solve more problems like this? I think many times when we use spirituality to escape our problems, it's because we again fall into that trap of thinking that the problems are bigger than our solutions. And that is the number one trap that we always seem to fall into when we're in fear, when we're in stress. We seem to feel like whatever problem that we're facing is insurmountable. Unless there's those problems, like I know, like I'm raising twin boys at the age of 1 and a 5-year-old daughter. It's not easy, but it's not like I feel like I need to escape it, because I know there's light at the end of the tunnel. I know that this is really beautiful for my soul. So I deal with it in that respect. But a lot of us, we do find ways to just tune out. We drink, we smoke, we do anything to alter our consciousness as coping mechanisms for a system that we don't know how to live within. And what I would say is, you know, for me, I don't mind using coping mechanisms very sparingly, you know, and you got to keep coping mechanisms in check, because sometimes you really do want to have that hard conversation, but you just got off of a very long day at work and you're like, you know what, maybe this isn't the time to do that. So you got to be honest with yourselves as well. Escapism is a real thing. And I think the number one reason why we enter into escapism is because we forget who we are. And who we are is infinite. So there's no such thing as a problem bigger than our solutions. There's nothing. It may take a lot of time and energy, blood, sweat, and tears, but that just becomes a mission. It doesn't become a problem doesn't stay a problem. You know, like you'll call a rock wall when you're climbing, that's a problem. You have a different rock wall, it's a different problem, right? You have to engage with it differently. But I think the worst traumatic thing you can do to yourself, to your psyche, and to the people around you who know you, because they will witness it in your posture, in your behavior, is if you let the fear cause you to shrink from that problem. You don't rise to the occasion. You don't realize that you can at least engage in it. And you might get knocked on your butt, right? You might get hurt. You might not completely understand something or race into it, but if you know it's in your heart, this is the path you should be taking. You should say this to this person, or you are not supposed to take this money to do that job. You know it in your heart. Okay, you got to balance it. Are you feeding your family? What else can you do? You got to be realistic. And that usually makes people check out. Oh, it's too complicated. But not all tasks are, oh, this is such a heavy sledgehammer. Some tasks are all up here and they're very difficult. That doesn't mean we shouldn't rise to the occasion. So yes, spirituality can be escapism if we forget our nature.
Yeah, well said. We are getting closer to the end of the interview, so please tell us more about your programs, Art of Awakening or anything else you are doing on your end.
Yeah, so I'm revamping my coaching. On my website, it's benjosephstewart.com. And I'm revamping it right now. I have coaching, so Limitless lifestyle coaching, which is basically a holistic way of overcoming obstacles that enter our lives. And so go to benjosephstewart.com. You can find that. I'm revamping it. It's not available right now, but I'm going to be coming back in with like a tiered system for people to enter the mystery school, I call it, because life is a mystery school. And this is basically set up as ways to do your rites of passage, into this school. And it's a close-knit group. The other projects that I'm working on, you mentioned at the beginning, there's a cannabis film that's coming out here soon, probably within a month. That is called The Magic Plant, and that will be on Pete Evans. He's a chef out of Australia. He's a very famous chef out there. He's the one in the film. It's going to be on his network, the Evolve Network. And other projects that I have going on right now are DMT Quest, all about endogenous dimethyltryptamine in the brain. It's a powerful psychedelic that we produce in our own brains. And there's brand new science showing more and more what the role is, in what ratios it actually sits. It's incredible. So that's another project I have going on. And then on top of that, there's a lot of bigger projects in the work that I can't really get into, but it's about land restoration and taking what seem to be defunct golf courses and different areas that through COVID-19 and just economic upheaval, it's open, it's up for grabs. First thing we want to do is restore the soil, start bouncing nature back to what it should be, and then using fiber optic instead of 5G. Even though it may not disassemble 5G towers around, as an example, fiber optic is a way to have everything that we want without the EMFs and without that pollution. So there's several projects going on, but I would say if anyone wants to reach me, benjosephstewart.com. And you can also email me at ben@benjosephstewart.com.
Yeah, we'll have all these details in the presentation of this video so they can contact you. Ben, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. I mean, we can talk for another hour for sure, but we've played it here. All the best with your movies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for my viewers, please watch it, share it, and subscribe. You can also go to my Patreon account, patreon.com/Claudiu Murgan. And until next time, love and gratitude.